Welcome to the Randy Gravitt Leadership Podcast, where we help you lead the hardest person you will ever lead, yourself. Here's your host, someone who believes leadership begins at home, Randy Gravitt.
Thanks for joining us for another episode here this week. I'm so excited. We've been down here at City of Refuge in Atlanta, and you're in town from Holland, Michigan. Dan Webster with us. He was with us last week, and you've agreed to join us again for a second run at this thing. And so thank you, Dan. Dan is he's an author, a communicator, great husband and dad, 3 sons. I got the girls covered. You got the guys covered. They're all grown now and off the payroll. We're all happy about that. That's kind of cool. And so we're just hanging out. It's been a great time to connect this week. We've been investing in some young leaders. Dan's been a mentor to me and a friend. He's really helped me through the years. And one of the fun things that we've been able to do is write a couple of books together. We wrote Finding Your Way, which we talked about last week.
A little bit.
If we did, yeah. And if you haven't heard last week's, go back and check that out. He was with us and just shared some great stuff about his story and some real great perspective on his really your work now is called Authentic Leadership. It's your company, and you talked to us a little bit about being an authentic leader, but I want to get into a little bit this week to what it means to live and lead with traction, and kind of go off on our second book we did together, Unstuck. So all that to say, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here. I'm pumped to have you back.
Well, thanks, Randall. We talked last week about my little 40-year-old stop sign hitting experience that kicked me into a 18-month midlife dip, trying to sort out what went on, and trying to figure out how do I catch wind into the second half of my life. So out of that whole experience, I am neurotically curious, if I can say that in a positive way, about how people grow and form, and I'm incredibly curious about life process. So I'm constantly trying to put meaning to life. All of us try to create meaning around the things that happen to us.
Yeah.
So out of that metaphor we talked about last week of above and below the waterline, I started to play with the idea that I wonder if, in generalities, the first half of our lives up to age 40-ish is primarily focused above the waterline on work of the work, and then something happens between 35 and 50 that tends to turn our apple cart over, that focuses us on a different area of leader development that's just as important. So I started playing with that and actually created a 6-phase development construct that we tease out in Unstuck.
Yeah.
And so let me just do
a
Reader's Digest.
I want you to walk us through that.
So
and I've got some questions probably.
Okay, good. So if we just begin, if we think if we draw a horizontal line and that represents the water line,
maybe for those of you watching on YouTube, I can find it in the book and I'll show you a picture of it here.
It's a beautiful, I think Leonardo
I think that's right.
DiCaprio wrote that.
That's right. We'll find it. You keep talking. That's great.
So if we draw a horizontal line and we think like above that is above the water line, below is below the water line. There it is right there.
Yeah, there we go, right there.
Yeah.
Above and below.
Most of us begin in our 20s in what I call the excitement phase. And so the excitement phase, there's a purpose and there are lessons to learn in each one of these phases as we mature. And these are the things that, as I sorted out my life experience, it fell into this pattern. And so I've been talking about this pattern for a long time. We wrote a book about it, and there seems to be enough truth to it that it's got some legs. People will decide whether it does or not.
Yeah.
So the excitement phase it's all about energy to launch.
Yeah.
Because anything on the front end needs a whole bunch of energy. And we're young, we have the energy of 2 or 3 people. So some of the core lessons there in the excitement phase is trying to figure out who we are and what we're about. And that's what Finding Your Way is about. If I can get somewhat close, if I can discern what gives me life, what sucks life out of me, what my interests and authentic talents are, then hopefully I can lean into a vocation, a sense of calling, where I can unleash the best of me on the planet and make a contribution. So we begin with the excitement phase. I got hired in student ministry. You know, we could talk about the excitement phase for you, launch and integrate leadership. I mean, there's all sorts of parallels. But So we don't stay in that phase for a long time.
And it's not, and by the way, it's not just at work. I mean, it's like in a relationship. When
Sure.
you first start dating somebody, you're excited. Or when you
yeah.
first get married, you're excited. And,
Exactly.
you know,
yeah.
I mean,
it could
so
be
it's
the life of a coach, a life of a teacher,
whatever.
the
You
life
got
of a couple.
new season, you're
Yep,
excited.
yep,
First day
yep.
of school, you're pretty
It's
excited.
exciting.
Every day after that
It's
kind of went
exciting.
downhill. But the first day was pretty cool. So it's like that every single person can at some level relate to there's this
I think
time
so.
where you felt good about what you're doing.
Sure. Well, how long does it take before you bump into a challenge, a problem, a situation where you get exposed for what you don't know?
Yeah.
And
You bring your kid home from the hospital and you're going, what do we do?
what do we do? Yeah.
Yeah.
Where's the nurse?
Yeah, exactly.
Someone heat up a bottle here. So that middle pie piece above the waterline is the fundamentals phase.
Yeah.
And so the fundamentals phase is all about preparation to make my contribution.
Yeah.
Because in any vocation, there are a set of core fundamentals that if I'm going to be successful and productive and fruitful in that vocation, I have to identify those and I have to figure out how do I master those.
Yeah.
Because if I can master these, then I can move myself ahead professionally, and there will be another challenge and another set of fundamentals. And so in that phase, number one, to recognize what are those fundamentals. Me as a director of student ministry for the first 20 years, I had to figure out, what are the 6 or 7 things that are true about really good directors of student ministry.
Right.
And so I got my arms around those, and then I found people who could mentor me in each one of those. I mean, I got close to them and I sucked the life out of them.
How to communicate, how to build a team, how to grow a volunteer base. I mean, all those kind of things for you.
All of that
for
stuff. How to
somebody else
understand student culture,
Yeah.
how to communicate biblical truth in a relevant way to kids. I mean, all those things. How to structure our ministry for growth so that it can stay small even
But
if it
for
gets
anybody, whether they're in that
Yeah.
or whether they're in a marriage or whatever, they've got to learn the fundamentals of the relationship, the fundamentals of the business, the fundamentals of whatever. So
Whatever it
the
is.
fundamentals is
If you're
is phase
married,
2.
the fundamentals are how do I live with this person
Yeah.
and not commit murder?
Yeah. Yeah. That's
How do
good.
I learn how to live with this
Yeah,
dude,
that's
or
good.
this man or this woman?
Yeah.
And then so after however long a period that is, if that's an internship, if that's just 3 or 4 years of experience or whatever that is, then you get to this last pie piece, which is the contribution phase.
Right, you start getting better. And
That's right, where now it's about me really stepping up and the goodness of my talent and stuff is really contributing.
Yeah.
And, in the fundamentals phase, one of the core lessons is to stay teachable, is to find those mentors and to realize the most important job I ever have is this one, because if I can't be faithful here, I've got to be faithful in little so I can be faithful in much.
Yeah.
When I get over here, now I become a mentor to those who are in the fundamentals phase.
Yeah.
And there are different challenges. How do I stay passionate? Things that I did that were new in the excitement phase, I've done 30 or 40 times
Right,
now. And how do I stay energized about that?
Yeah.
So who do I listen to? Who do I get around? And that pretty much for me was the first, almost 20 years of my vocation.
Yeah.
And then at age 40, I slam into this thing called a stop sign.
Yeah, so that's where I wanted to go next. So we have this in Finding Your Way, this story about Mark Johnson, who is a college senior, but his dad, who I won't give any of the stories away, but his dad is George, and the sequel, Unstuck, really is about his father, who is at that spot in his life where he bumps up. He's at a stop sign in his life. His son has finally found this compass to help him know how to navigate things, but George all of a sudden realizes, I'm upside down himself. And so he hits his stop sign. So
yeah. George grew up in an era. It was a little different than Mark's.
Yeah.
George really encouraged Mark, pointed him in a certain direction academically.
Right.
That was George's bend. And then Mark is a senior and he's realizing I'm not feeling it. And he thinks he's got to change his major.
Yeah.
And he refuses to live his dad's life, which creates a huge argument.
A little bit of chaos, yeah.
A lot of
chaos, yeah.
But one of the positive sides of that is that his dad, George, begins to wonder, okay, now why did I pursue my vocation?
Right.
Was it just security? Was it true interest? And so, like you
And
said,
he hits that stop sign,
that
but
is
he realizes
exactly
at that point, the language we used was he realizes he's stuck.
he is stuck.
And
That's
so
right.
if a leader's out there and they used to be excited, they learned how to do it, they started contributing, and then all of a sudden they run into this, what I call the mundane middle. They just get, it's just,
I'll tell you, a
it can
stop
be
sign,
a slog, man. I mean, so help
sign,
us.
Well, a stop sign can be like my thing, being successful and then losing juice. It can be you've been doing it for a long time and it just gets old. You can blow up a marriage. You could get fired. I mean, there are all sorts of things. You could be single and want to be married, and you're not married at age 35.
And you just get stuck.
You could
paralyzed by that.
get a bad diagnosis. I mean, there are so many things that can create a stop sign. The challenge when you hit a stop sign at that point is I can either curse it or I can become curious about it. Because the purpose of a stop sign is to get our attention. You can say...
You can't run a stop sign without getting in trouble.
You can't. And you can either say life is trying to get my attention or God is trying to get my attention. But that is a place at which Parker Palmer has been a great mentor to me. And he talks about how critical it is to learn to listen to your life, to pay attention to what's going on. Just not in the numbers above the waterline if you're working, but in what's going on beneath the waterline, to pay attention. What's my relationship with my spouse like? What are my relationship with my kids like? How am I feeling about myself? What are my health habits? All these different multifaceted things. But the fact of the matter is when I hit a stop sign, I can either curse this or I can open my heart and I can become curious, and then I move beneath the waterline to this next phase. If you've got, excitement, fundamentals, contribution, stop sign, the next phase is called the misery phase.
The misery phase. And you shared with me that, I want to tie on something you said there before you jump into that. You shared with me a verse from King Solomon who talked about either going, I think from Ecclesiastes, it talks about either going into the house of pleasure or the house of mourning.
That's a great verse in
And
Ecclesiastes
so
7.
Yeah, and so you get to this point where you realize that the house of pleasure is, you can try to medicate your pain, or you can try to, make it go away. You can buy a little red sports car. You can do all kind of stuff. You can blow up your life if you chase the pleasure, or you can realize maybe I had my perspective wrong and I was putting my hope in the wrong thing, and all kind of things get upside down. And so that's that place. That's where the mourning comes in, where you just go, this is not going to work if I. And it literally can become. We both know miserable if you don't deal with it. So
it is.
Talk about the misery, because I'm guessing there are people listening who are miserable right now.
Yeah, the mind of the wise is in the house of mourning. The mind of the fool is in the house of pleasure.
Yeah.
And when we feel that kind of pain and misery, everything within us wants to irrigate that pain. And like you said, there's a well-worn path to the house of pleasure that we can run down. And if we go there, we haven't solved the initial problem. And now, we could binge buy, we could binge watch, we could get involved in pornography, we could, get involved in addiction of all kinds of things. And then you got two issues now that you've got to fight. And so Solomon says it's wiser to walk into the house of mourning, which means to be willing to sit at the feet of your own pain. And to, in the misery phase, to try to identify what Sue Monk Kidd in her book, When the Heart Waits, says are sacred questions, where you become curious and you begin to, rumble with the fact that, oh my gosh, I'm experiencing this. What's happened to me? That's a sacred question. What has changed in my life circumstances? How has my work changed over the last 5 years? What's my relationship with my mom or dad like? Because we carry our family of origin, my mom and dad are in this room right now, even though I'm in my 60s. I still carry them. We still do. And so you begin to identify those sacred questions that if I can answer those, and if I can begin to dig into those could be doors that could open to a level of growth and maturity that I don't get above the waterline. And so the challenge is, if I walk into this experience beneath the waterline and I welcome misery, and for me, my misery was boredom, exhaustion, and disillusionment.
Yeah, you're bored, you're tired, you're disillusioned when you get into this misery phase if you're not careful.
That's exactly where I was. And so that's why those weren't quick answers.
Yeah.
That's why it took me 18 months, where I had to continue to work above the waterline, but I was limping kind of above the waterline as I was trying to get clarity below.
Is it fair to say, I think it was Henry Nouwen who said, the courageous leader is not the one who blazes a trail into the future. We're all thinking about how can we push the ball down the field.
Doesn't just blaze a trail.
But he says the courageous leader doesn't just do that, but the courageous leader blazes a trail into his or her own heart. And
That's a great quote.
That's what you're talking about. It's like you have to come to grips with the fact that I am bored right now, and I am tired, and I am disillusioned, and I have hit a stop sign, and I'm having a hard time. I'm having to manufacture energy and engagement. Yeah. So many leaders get there and don't know what to do with that.
There's another group of leaders that get there, and rather than looking in the mirror, rather than paying attention to what their life and others are saying to them, they they manifest characteristics of narcissism, and they blame everybody else. Yeah. That the solution to what they're going through is always outside of the room that they're in. Yeah. And I have worked with leaders, and I've been able to help them because they become militantly resistant to allowing truth into their lives. Yeah. And when that happens, you walk on a pathway to become a less integrous human being. Yeah. And eventually you get in.
And you forfeit your leadership.
You forfeit
forfeit your legacy, you forfeit all that stuff. We talked about trying to create legacy. I mean, it's out the window if you can't get past that. Yeah. So
what do you do?
Help us get past. Yeah, exactly. Okay. So we don't have to thankfully stay at misery. There's hope, right?
Well, yeah, absolutely. There's hope. There's unbelievable graces that are available there. The next phase is, if we identify those questions, and the next phase is the renewal phase. Some people call it the introspection phase. And in that phase, you wrestle the truth of your life to the ground. You answer these sacred questions. You de-illusionize your life of naive assumptions you thought about what work would do above the waterline that really it doesn't do for you. It can only do so much. It's a wonderful part of our lives, but it's not the whole ball game. And so the renewal formula that you and I, and mainly you, birthed as we talked for hours about this construct, why don't you go ahead and tell, because we came up with this very simple kind of formula.
Yeah, so I'm an old country boy, and we used to get in these
so 2 pigs plus 1 horse
exactly
equals
I don't know, but we used to get in these 4-wheel drives, and we would go mudding is what we called it. Sure. And we would end up stuck all the time. We get stuck, and you have your buddy, hopefully he's got a chain, and they hook you up and pull you out, or my granddad, my dad were teaching me you got to get some boards or sticks or rocks, whatever. You got to, when you get stuck, you need traction. Trying harder is not going to get you unstuck at that point. Yeah. Pushing the accelerator harder is not going to do it. And so for me, when I think about it, it just makes things muddier. Slinging stuff everywhere. And there's so many leaders who get to that spot of being stuck, and they just think, I'll just try harder. I'll double down on what I know. I'll,
change vocations.
Change vocations. I'll change spouses, whatever. And
buy a Corvette.
Buy a Corvette, whatever they do. And it just doesn't work. They've got to have traction. So for me, I'm pretty simple. I just said, okay, could it be as simple as I got to admit where I am? And so that's the introspection. I work with companies and leaders all over the place, and they're talking about inspection. There's all these inspections and government regulations, and those are great. But who's ever even talking about inspecting on the inside? And I think when we introspect, when we look on the inside, that's powerful.
That's listening to your life.
It's listening to your life. It really is. And so introspection is great, but it's not enough. I get to this point, I realize I'm going in the wrong direction. And so it's not even enough to it's almost like if the illustration we use in the book is if you're going east in a car and you realize you should be going west, it's not enough to know that and just take your foot off the gas. And I think that's what happens a lot of times as leaders. We just disengage, right? And so we've got to literally stop and turn the thing around. So introspection plus redirection. Right. But it's not enough just to turn the car around. We've got to actually go the different directions. So introspection plus redirection plus action. We got to put that foot back on the accelerator, and then all of a sudden traction comes, and renewal is a beautiful thing, man.
Yeah, it is. And that's a brilliant little formula that came out of your mind in the middle of an afternoon. That traction formula, introspection plus redirection plus action equals traction. And so that's what you're doing in the renewal phase, is you're wrestling some of these issues to the ground, and you're uncovering insights and graces about yourself and how you behave, and things that you thought were true about you that may not be true, because beneath the water, the work of the heart beneath the waterline, it's about depth, it's about congruence. Mm-hmm. It's about living an authentic life, living consistently into genuinely who you are. Yeah. Because sometimes those stop signs are, we lived out we lived out the socially prescribed roles that our parents or our uncles put for us, or our aunts or whatever. And I've had people sit in my room to do a life plan, kind of a personal leadership summit, who are 40 years old, and they've said to me, I don't know if I've lived one day in my own skin.
Yeah.
And I feel like I've lived out what everybody else has wanted me to do. And they've said to me, whatever it means, if it means I turn over my apple cart here, help me sort out, walk me through a process that can help me get clear on who I am. And I want to live into the truth of who I am, whatever that means. I can't live another day. And to me, that's sacred. That kind of humility and openness.
I want you to say more about that, because I mentioned it was always great when my buddy had a chain and he could pull me out. And you do that. You help leaders when they get upside down do that. But I think sometimes leaders have this tendency when things are not going well and they hit that stop sign and they get to that misery thing, sometimes they choose to isolate themselves. And I think that's really dangerous.
It is.
And so it's important, don't you think, to have people around you who can help you toward renewal? Developing
Authentic friendships that love you, that you trust enough to be able to talk about the real condition of your life, so that you can not pretend or cover or just skim through life, but to really embrace those things and to mature and grow and offer grace and to each other and truth to each other, so that we can mature and move ahead. That's a whole other conversation. But fortunately, you had some of those relationships. Yeah. So, I can't expect anyone to save me.
Yeah.
I have to do my work. I have to own my authentic.
It's the self-leadership piece.
It
right?
is. So I have to be willing to take an honest look at this. Then part of the renewal phase is finding who are a few of those people that I could process this with, that wouldn't shame me, make fun of me, or say, I told you so, or whatever. And sometimes a therapist can do that. Sometimes a pastor can do that. Sometimes a couple of brothers or sisters or friends who love you. That's part of the work that I do with people, to help them sort that stuff out, where we can, where we can just put the truth on the table and look at it, and not be intimidated, not let it kick our butts. We can look at it, we can sort through, we can find the good things that can come out of this, and we can look at some of the patterns that might have been created, some of the obstacles, the things that are creating resistance, and that's all the work of the renewal phase. And if we do that work over time, and you learn, you layer learnings, kind of small learnings that begin to give you buoyancy. It's like you begin to kind of pump some air back into that buoy, and it starts to gain enough. Then this last phase, you got excitement, fundamentals, contribution, misery, renewal or introspection. Then there's the wisdom phase.
Yeah.
And the wisdom phase is where you've matured, you've grown up. You recognize that mature people live in a lot of tensions. The tension between, I really do want to be a servant in the world and make a great contribution, but I also need to self-care. I have ambition that I really do want to move ahead, blah, 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 but I don't want to become solely focus on that without abiding in my core values. I can get in trouble. There's a tension there.
You can be content with who you are and what you're doing, but not satisfied that you still want to take territory. And so there are these tensions.
And that's part of, people with wisdom understand that mature people, they don't eliminate those tensions. They learn how to live in them with grace.
Right. They have perspective, would you say?
And I think also one of the fruits of the renewal phase is you learn what renewal exercises look like, what renewal habits begin to look like. Because almost everybody has abused themselves and hasn't paid attention to the kinds of things that we need to do consistently to keep our own lives buoyant, to keep us renewed and refreshed and growing.
So for leaders who are listening, who are, maybe they don't do as good a job at leading themselves as they think about leading others all the time. They're trying to build big stuff, but they maybe don't spend as much time. I used the analogy a couple of weeks ago of, it's almost like we have this gas tank, this gauge that it's running low. There are people listening who are running on fumes right now.
That's right.
And if we don't take time to refuel the tank, So talk to me about some of those regenerative practices,
Well,
some of those
it's a
things
perfect
that we
picture,
do.
and people smarter than us have written books about
Yeah,
gauges
yeah.
and red lights,
Yeah.
And oil lamps that come on your dashboard.
Yeah, I said a couple weeks ago, it would be so cool if we had this leadership warning light, like you better slow down, or you better stop, or you better. But like, what are some literal things we can do? I mean, I'm always trying to give people things that they can go
Sure.
and try. So, you've been at this a while. I mean, you've been leading well for a long time, and you're trying to finish well, and we'll talk about that in a second. But look, just as you take care of yourself and as you encourage leaders and you do these personal leadership summits with people, like, what are some things that you could give us that we could go and apply real quick?
Well, sometimes it comes down to making a decision. What are the principles? What are the priorities, my core values that I am going to live my life from? And so if health, physical health, is a core value, then I need to think every single day, what are things that I can do as far as drinking a gallon of water, as far as monitoring what I take in, as far as the amount of exercise that I get, the amount of sleep that I get. So health habits are a daily choice.
Yeah.
And obviously once a year we go to the doctor and he'll light us up or talk about our blood or our blood pressure and stuff like that. So that's one thing, to deal with the health. To manage that. For me, leading my own heart for me is critical, which means that we have a good friend, Jimmy Page, who I think you interviewed. He talked about you have to win the morning in order to win the day.
Yeah.
And I think that that's true. And so some people, you have to figure out in the rhythm of your life, with the demands of your vocation, the age of your family, what time works for you. For me, I'm up every morning, between 5:30 and 6, and I have an hour and a half where I get quiet. I reflect on yesterday. I think through the conversation I had yesterday. I spent some time reading the Bible, and I try to listen to, one of my core values is my faith, and so I try to authentically nurture my faith. I try to pray, pray for the people that I love, and then I try to think through what are the most important things to do today. So that has just become a habit now. So 5 or 6 days a week, that's what I do. And so there's a heart dimension, and for some people who have 3 kids under 6 years old, and they lay concrete, that probably is not going to work. Yeah, that person may have to be on the road at 6 a.m. and getting up at 4 takes an incredible amount of discipline. So you got to figure out.
They may need some earbuds with a trowel in their hand or whatever.
Well,
is that what it's called?
It may be. I mean, and so you figure out what are things that I do that allow my soul to catch wind. I know Ken Blanchard was counseled by a good friend. He said, Ken, you just got to enter your day more slowly. And so whether that is like, there are days when I'll get up and I've got an 8-minute drive from my home to the club I work out at. And so I've got a couple of songs that I will play between my house and my workout. I can either put on ESPN radio, or I can listen to, some other news feed on, Sirius radio, or I can listen to a couple songs that will help nurture my faith. Yeah, they might be worship songs that'll give me perspective on my day. So to figure out what are the renewal activities that I can do consistently that will breathe life back into me, and to have some kind of flexibility to try those different things. It may be the kind of thing where you have a half an hour at lunch, and instead of going out to lunch, you find a location where you go and you sit down with your sack lunch, or you go sit in your car, and a couple Tuesday, Thursday, you don't do anything at lunch. You just pay attention to your own heart. You feed
what's
your
going
heart.
on, and
you listen, and then you also think about what are the things that I read, who are the people that I listen to. Right now we're in such a heavy. It's hard to know what to believe on any news channel right now, and so you can just get lost into the downward spiral of political confusion and frustration. And sometimes it's just better to back up from that.
Just turn it off.
Yeah. If it's destructive. So to think, okay, health, physically, what am I doing? Am I making those right decisions? How do I measure that? My heart, what are the things that I do? If I can't do it every morning, how many mornings do I do it? When do I do it? What does that look like, to try to find things that do renew you? And then you look at fun, hobbies.
Yeah.
Do you like to golf? Do you fish? Do you like to be part of a reading club? Whatever you can do, and to, without guilt, try to make sure that that's part of your schedule. When you have young kids, coaching, that kind of thing can kind of be a double deal where you can knock two birds down with one stone. Life is so dynamic that usually people will not make adjustments to how they're living until they get knocked on their rear end at a stop sign.
Yeah.
And then their heart becomes open. They realize, I have to reconfigure how I do my life. And that's one of the graces of the renewal phase, is you realize I'm either going to implode and live the rest of my life miserable, or live in this habit, or I'm going to blow up my marriage, or I'm going to go through the challenge of growing the heck up, of maturing, so I can take better care of myself to sustain making my contribution.
Yeah.
And so
one of the things we say, or we give all these sacred questions you mentioned. We give a lot of questions in here. But is it fair to say one of the sacred questions is, I need to know what brings life to me?
Sure, absolutely.
I mean, I really do. I need to know what fills my tank back up and what drains the dog out of me. And if I'm not careful, if I don't start paying attention, I can get drained real quick. You mentioned reading there, even as a hobby. I don't know if you naturally love to read or not, but I know, as long as I've known you, 25 years, you've been reading, and you every few weeks out of the blue, I'll get a book in the mail, and you're like, you need to read this. And so,
because I need to know about it, so I sent it to you to read.
You sent it to me and say, oh yeah, I do my book reports on them. But no, you have valued books as a leader. Tell me how those have added value to your life. You don't have to give specific titles or anything, but why do you think books are so important for leaders to wrestle with other people's ideas and those kind of things?
Well, they embody people who have experience. They're all mentors. They're all people that are further ahead.
Yeah.
And so, a very important value to me is personal growth. And so, for me to grow, I need to continue to expose myself to people that are smarter than me, or have a different tact on me, or whatever. And the last couple of years, I've even gone and gotten certifications through a national organization just to mature, to get additional levels of maturity. So, the books, people can talk about novels, and they take you into other worlds. They expose you to history. They expose you to different experiences. I tend to read life process books that give insight into how people form and grow. I don't know why. If I'm authentic to me, one of the things that I talk about is when you show up and you bring you in a healthy place, what do you bring to the party? Mm-hmm. And I walk into a room and I look at people, and I can't not wonder who they are, how they got to where they are. I don't think about how much money they make. I look at them, and I just know that there's this amazing story of all these different things that have contributed to them, and I'm curious about how did they get to choose this career? How did they get to be a chicken salesman?
Yeah. Yeah.
Mark Miller, our friend. And so, one of the really encouraging things about the wisdom phase is that you awaken to the fact that there are graces that come to your life that you would never have experienced if you had at the stop sign said,
just
forget that, I'm going back to the excitement phase, I'm going to take a new job, rather than mature as a leader. Because you think of how powerful a woman or a man is who isn't just developed skill-wise, but has the kind of character that they've navigated through this. And then they come into their 45 on, and you think of the value that they bring to an organization and to life, to people.
Yeah.
It's awesome. But there's a fantastic story that I love to tell, and maybe we can, kind of wind down with this one. Sue Monk Kidd, in her book, When the Heart Waits, she talks about growing up in the South, and she had a nanny, 2 older brothers and a nanny whose name was Sweet. I can just visualize this woman. And they would go over to their grandmother's house during the summer, and Sweet would come with them. And every day, Sweet would take Sue, they'd walk out the front door, and 4 blocks straight ahead was a swing set. And they'd go and they'd swing. And she loved that. She's a beautiful writer. She says one day she's inside the house and her two older brothers come running into the kitchen. So she follows them into the kitchen. And her older brothers tell Sweet, we found a puddle outside with 1,000 tadpoles in it. So Sweet takes out, 3 mason jars and taps little holes and gives it to her older brothers and to Sue. And so her two older brothers zip out the door. And Sue is younger, so she's kind of following behind them. Well, her grandmother says, Sue, stop, where are you going? And Sue says, I'm going outside to play in the puddle. And her grandmother says, no, honey, little girls don't do that. You come sit at the piano and I'll teach you a song. So she's just brilliant. She says, there I am. I'm sitting at the piano. My hands are on the keys and my heart's in the puddle.
Oh, wow.
It's just beautiful.
That's great.
And so she doesn't get to play in the puddle. She said, the next day, Sweet and I are walking out the front door to go swing. And Sweet says to me, Sue, would it be okay if we walk to the park today the long way around? And so Sue says, well, I'm 9 years old. I'm impatient, but I love this woman. So I go, okay. So she said, we walk out and we hang a hard right turn. And we're walking a block away from the park where she pushes me on the swing, and I'm getting impatient. She says, we walk 2 blocks, and I'm about ready to explode, and Sweet is paying attention to me. And I turn around, and I say, Sweet, and she says, Sue, shh. And she waves me over next to her, and I look down, and there's a wheelbarrow with 1,000 tadpoles in it, and she pulls a mason jar from underneath her robe and says, here, honey. And I, for the next 30 minutes, collect tadpoles and play with these little treasures. And the next line in the book, I can remember reading it, and it was so impactful to me, I teared up. The next line of the book, she says, that was the day I learned that there ain't no tadpoles unless you go the long way around.
Wow.
And I realized that each one of those tadpoles were lessons I learned. They were people that helped me. They were authors that I read. All these graces that came to my life that contributed. And when you think about life and leadership development, do people ever really develop A, B, C? Doesn't the Lord and life tend to take us the long way around? And don't we tend to mature the long way around? And if you can surrender to that and grow through that, you get to that place of wisdom where you just go, man, I'm really thankful that I grew up in a home where my dad wasn't everything he should have been, but he did the best he could, and there are certain things he did give to me, and I'm grateful for that. He let down on some levels, and there was a time when I got fired, and rather than throw a Molotov cocktail through the window, I welcomed that, and I realized after I got over the initial emotional dizziness, I sat down and I said, okay, what was it about me? Was I in the wrong job? And I grew through that, and now I'm in a role, and that was an incredible grace. I mean, there are all these things that we can learn if we have the kind of teachability.
So, that's fantastic stuff. I want to close with this. So you get to this point where you have this tremendous perspective at your point now, and here you are. You've just been so faithful for so long, and yet I hear you saying you just joined you're in your late 60s, and you just joined this thing, and you're trying to learn, and you're reading and stuff, and you're trying to grow, and I know you're passionate about finishing well. We just kind of close us out with an encouragement to people who are maybe in the middle right now. They're just still slugging it out. They got little kids. You mentioned that, or they've got a kid, or maybe they're my age, and I'm a little bit behind you. And like, what would you say to people who are maybe losing buoyancy? They're losing their heart. They are stuck. Is there any final word to this idea of finishing well? What, from a self-leadership standpoint, what would you say to?
Well, marijuana is legalized now, isn't it?
Not recommended.
Oh, sorry. Just.
Yeah, you California boy speaking.
Yeah, that's true. That was the California boy.
Yeah, what would you say?
It's hard to know exactly what to say, because I look back there, and what enabled me to survive was to not quit, to continue to stay curious, and to continue to have a heart to be willing to grow, to mature, and to become whole. And so that and why was that true of me? Why didn't I quit? Was that part of the temperament of my dad, in me? I mean, he was an entrepreneur, and he gave me an entrepreneurial spirit to start things new. But to rally, to understand that part of life's journey is that you're gonna get knocked down at times. You're gonna face discouragement, and so welcome to the human race.
Yeah.
And to just show up every day and to be faithful, and to continue to figure out how do I honor, who do I want to be? Am I moving in the direction of who I want to be? And for me, it's authenticity and generosity and faith. Am I moving in that direction? How are my life circumstances right now? How can they be leveraged for my good and my growth? And how can I stay in that place? I got to be aware of that. I need to see that good things can happen. And then also to somehow never lose, we've talked about this, the wonder and the miracle of life. Somehow, how does God grace us with the ability, even when we're in stress, to walk out in the morning and all of a sudden, oh my gosh, dawn's just happening and I can see the pink on the cloud edges. Or, my gosh, the yellow flowers are still blooming and it's 40 degrees in my front yard. And life is amazing. It's a miracle. And to be able to, so isn't this, maybe can you get there without navigating this and get into wisdom? Because for me, I'm at a place where I recognize there's places in my life that are still really difficult. But I also have this balancing reality of that life is a miracle and this is a wonderful thing. And to be with one of my truly best friends is a grace right now.
Yeah.
And in this moment, we can celebrate life and be grateful together that we are growing, that we have hung in there, so, I don't know. It's, some people might say, well, it's just to continue to manifest grit and to hang in there because things will get better. But I think that those hard things are really the places that can offer grace. If we have the kind of commitment to wholeness and to maturity.
Yeah.
Because then everything that happens to us, we get knocked down, we get pissed off for a while, we get angry. But when you gain perspective, you can see this can be used for good in my life.
Yeah, and I think when you get to that wisdom, here's the thing I love the most is I hear just as much excitement in you as there was when you started.
Yeah.
A long time ago. So when you get to that wisdom
I'm still
thing,
curious. You bet.
The excitement comes back. And so, man, what a gift it's been to have you here. And I just, as you were just, wrapping up there, you talked about the miracle and the wonder. What a miracle and a wonder it was, I think now 25 years ago when I walked in, before you left where you were, I walked into a room and you were teaching and just, I was just blown away.
Pretty cool.
And I had no idea what would happen, the friendship that would grow, the books that would come, the training that we get to do, the leader development. It's just been a gift in my life, and I look forward to for more to come, and I'll look for the next book in the mail, and I'll give you a full report on it. It'll be great. So thank you for being with us. It's been a treasure. Thank you for listening. I know you're out there, and maybe you are in the middle of the fight right now, or maybe you're toward the finish line, or maybe you're just getting started. But let me just encourage you, the hardest person you'll lead is yourself. But if you can get that right, if you can lead you, I'm convinced you can add tremendous value to those around you. When leaders get better, everything gets better. And I would warn you that if you don't pay attention to some of the things Dan's talked about, and you don't lead yourself well, you stay stuck, it's going to affect the others around you in a negative way. And so let's just be faithful to lead ourselves well. Let's make sure we work on ourselves. We lead ourselves. We'll be positioned to have tremendous impact on others. Please help spread the word. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next week.
Thanks for listening to the Randy Gravitt Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed today's show, we ask you to leave a review if you haven't already, and subscribe so you'll be alerted when we post new content. We also encourage you to share a link with your friends. Tune in Friday for another episode with a special guest leader. Now, go lead yourself first. Remember, leadership begins at home.